I hate to disappoint anyone who thought I might say something pithy or celebratory about the World Series today, but having never watched a baseball game the entire way through, I don't even truly know what it takes to win a baseball game. So I can only imagine that the Cubs fans feel somewhat like I did in 2015 when Gina Rowlands finally won an Oscar. Am I close? Is that sort of close? If so, I am ecstatic for you Cubs fans. Thank you for the cheer. But while all of these Cubs fans were cheering and the Cleveland fans were booing, I spent Wednesday thinking about All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, like a good theological nerd. That special time in our calendar when we are reminded of those we've lost, both in the past year and in the years prior. I meditated on the multiple deaths we've had in our congregation over the past few months and gave thanks for this community where intergenerational contact is alive and well and where our losses and celebrations are shouldered and lifted together. For the past 2 years, either All Saints or All Souls Day has conveniently fallen on a Sunday. So we've had explicit reason to build our services around these celebrations. But this year, they fell on Tuesday and Wednesday, days that might be long forgotten by the following Sunday. But especially in the wake of such recent and meaningful losses in our own community, I don't want to let this opportunity to remember pass us by. So in a few minutes, while we gather our elements for our communion moment, we'll offer candles to light here on the front of our baptismal font. I will help you, and there are some wicks that you can use to light the various candles, and we'll figure it out together. And if you don't have any need to light a candle for someone you've lost, you might consider lighting one for something. Because folks, we have almost made it to the end of this burning trash heap of an election cycle. Does anyone else have one of those stress twitches going on in your face? I usually get mine right here, right by my left eye, but my current twitch is right here, right smack dab in the middle of my forehead. Like Mary Shelley wrote, there is something at work in my soul that I do not understand, but it feels like a horror show. Hell, even The Onion cannot figure out a way to effectively satirize this cesspool. And speaking of burning trash heap horror shows, this past week also included that other favorite holiday of mine, the one that sends Greenwich Village into an annual tizzy, Halloween. I've made no secret of my love for this day, but I don't spend my beloved Halloween out and about in the hordes of paraders. I spend Halloween hunkered down at home, completing my annual October ritual of watching at least one monster movie every late evening of the entire month. Now, I know this is not a congregation of horror lovers, but I'd wager that each of you has witnessed at least one film that features a version of the following scene. Picture it. Close your eyes if you want to. It's about 20 minutes into the action. Our protagonist, having already felt the chill of that something's not right feeling, is getting ready to try for a fitful night of sleep. The music is ominous. The silences are deafening, the shadows are threatening, and our protagonist enters the tiny bathroom where grime is building up in the wall grout and the overhead light flickers oh so slightly. Our protagonist turns on the faucet, looks in the mirror, peers at a drawn face, an exhausted face, a frightened face, a familiar but foreign face, and then bends down to fill 2 hands with water and splash it onto that face. But as the protagonist bends down, the camera's perspective changes. So we can no longer see what's in the mirror. The camera closes in on the protagonist's wet hands as they meet the wet face But we, the shivering onlookers, know what's about to happen. As our protagonist rises back up to look again in the mirror, as the camera shifts focus back to that grimy reflection, we know what's coming in our hearts, and our hearts start to jump even before it happens. The monster is there, lurking just behind our protagonist's shoulders. There is a boom of sound. The music jabs with screeching violins. The protagonist screams. Maybe the glass shatters, and we scream, having known what was waiting in that mirror the entire time. And then the protagonist seizes up and is completely, utterly, unhelpfully paralyzed. The horror takes over, and the scene ends. I hate those scenes. I am a tried and true monster movie junkie, and I can stomach almost anything, but the mirror fake-out trick gets me every freaking time. And it's this kind of jump scare, the one where the fright is inevitable but still terrifies us anyway, that keeps most everyone I know from watching horror movies. But the thing is, I don't think it's really the monster in the reflection that makes us jump. It's the booming noise. It's the soundtrack. This is scientific. The jump scares in monster movies are all about noise, all about sound. And here's the trick from a pro. If you turn the volume down, if you make it so soft that you have to listen carefully, the whole scene is profoundly less terrifying. Gospel truth. But still, mirrors are tricky things. We need them in order to check up on how we're doing, how we're looking, what needs fixing, but they have a tendency to lie and tease and distort and make us feel either way too good about ourselves or way too bad about ourselves. Mirrors beckon too often for our attention, and even when we want to look closely, we fear they'll reveal the monstrosities we know are there, but are too timid or just too tired to face. And we've been dealing with the myths and meanings of mirrors for millennia. I'm not sure what a mirror looked like in the 1st and 2nd centuries, but the author of today's ancient testimony reading from the Epistle of James used this potent image of a mirror like a genius film director. We really have no idea who wrote this little New Testament nugget. For a long time, it was credited to Jesus' brother James, but most scholars now reject that assumption. No matter who wrote it, the book is clear in its intention. Your faith is impotent if it isn't tied to thoughtful action. James's faith is all about works. James doesn't think there's any legitimate religiosity that doesn't include faithful, attentive work. For James, you can talk the talk, but if you're not walking the walk with your whole heart, if you're not dancing the dance with your whole soul, not paying attention to those most in need around you, your word means nothing. James's idea of counteracting sinfulness is not some puritanical diatribe that we fear. It's an invitation to action. Turn down the volume. Hush and listen. James wants us to look in the mirror differently, attentively, not simply to see if we're losing that extra bit of weight or if our cowlick is staying down, but rather to look and try to discern who we really are. The bad news is that there are monsters in the mirror. The good news is that with the volume turned down and with your attentive ears perked, the scares don't have to make you jump. The monsters are just as scared as you. They look just like you. And by listening and facing them, there's something at work in your soul that wants you to keep moving, and that something might feel a little bit like God. Noisy jump scares have become a fact of life. Our chaotic social media feeds can be curated until our own reflection peers back at us, deliciously narcissistic. We can post and repost, afraid to look away for even a minute, fearing what might jump out from behind us when we look again. And even as we approach the end of an exhausting election cycle, one thing is clear. No matter what happens this coming Tuesday, our mirrors have been cracked. The reality of how divided our silos are is staring back at us from the shards. While we were playing peekaboo with our self-satisfied images, we became a collective monster that wants to have its mirror and smash it too. But one of the most beautiful things, even alongside the sadness of so many recent Judson deaths, has been listening to the stories told at each memorial service. At these rituals, it's as if the noise stops for a second, or an hour, or 2 hours. We turn down the volume and pay attention. Even as we mourn and grieve, we pick back up the reflective pieces of a life, the different shards that have been left with different people, the varied images that make up the image of a person. And we attempt to put them back together in order to create a whole reflection of a whole person. This is a process of remembering, an active working toward creating a wholeness from the disparate and interdependent parts, paying attention to all of the complications that can live inside just one person. We've now had 3 of the 4 memorials we'll have this fall. And though we've each been enjoying very unique memorial services that are tailored to unique and distinct personalities, there's been a common theme. I think Donna's heard it. I've heard it. I think you've heard it probably. Listening. At each service, multiple speakers have pointed out the gift of listening that our loved one embodied. At each service, multiple speakers have pointed out the care that each of them brought to conversation, the care that each brought to the work that they did in the world, and the care that each brought to coupling their faith with thoughtful action. This says something to me. Listening lasts. Listening leaves a legacy. There are tons of folks who just want to make it to Tuesday, and I am one of those people. No matter what happens, Tuesday might be the prologue to a horror movie. But Tuesday is not our funeral. We continue for better or worse, for better and worse. Tuesday will hold up a mirror to show us who we are as a country, but the mirror's already cracked, and it has been for a very long time. Still, broken mirrors offer a new opportunity. They begin to reflect angles we haven't seen before and invite us to look again, face the monster, and to listen with the volume turned down in new ways. Is it terrifying to not understand what happens next? That's a real question. Are you terrified? Is it terrifying? I am terrified. You not terrified? Come on up here. The whole maddening point of having faith in something like God is that we always have something at work in our souls that we do not understand. So what do we do when we don't understand and when we're frightened? I don't know about you, but I pray. So here's a little prayer for this country and for basically everything. Will you join me? Will you close your eyes for one more minute? God of burning trash heaps and of flickering flames of hope, God of monsters we fear and monsters we've made and monsters we recognize. Quiet us. Turn down the volume with us. Remind us to hush and listen. We are tired most days and especially today. Each hour feels precious, but even an extra hour of sleep can't seem to catch us up. Our muscles twitch, our hearts skip, our breaths catch, and each tiny tick threatens to build a new norm of unease. Move with us through our everyday losses and through our significant losses. Remind us that walking isn't something just done with legs, but with our lives. That dancing isn't just done with our bodies, but with our souls. That the works we do, that the moves we make in the world are an art, continuously honed and continuously reformed, if we will hush and listen. Listen. This quiet is us moving and waiting and gathering and preparing, but it is also just quiet. Quiet is not simply the moment of anticipation before the main event. Quiet is the main event. Fill this quiet with memory and curiosity. Fill this quiet with honesty and interest, with difference and intersection, with things we think we understand and things we will never understand. Help us to sustain this community and help us to hold those without community. Listen to us and listen with us. Show us the infinite within the finite, the beginnings within our endings, the flickering within the burning. And nudge us forward in the quiet of it all. Amen.